Is there a place in time where logic breaks down and wonderment begins? Could that be somewhere at some time along an infinite line between the reasonable and the highly unlikely? Join us on a journey into the improbable.
Makeshift Stories presents Episode 298, Manufactured Memory, read by Alan V. Hare. Opening and closing theme by Matthew Erdman. Somewhere and sometime, what you swear is the truth might be an implanted memory. An earlier version of this story, titled Depatterned, was originally released on November 17, 2018. This updated version is dedicated to the memory of Doug Bowman, a close friend and passionate supporter of Makeshift Stories, who recently passed away. While we never discussed this particular story, I believe it's one he would have enjoyed. The memory is like a burnt-in after-image on an old TV, a constant ghost behind the picture, faintly etched on the surface of my consciousness, ready to re-emerge when I'm relaxed enough for the perpetual whirl of anxiety to fade. I'm convinced that if you opened my skull, you would see it incised on the gyri of my brain. It's on a random hair trigger, too, which means I have no idea what will set it off. Tonight, it's the landing lights of a jet on final approach, which is thundering through the quickly fading dusk beyond the plate glass windows of the Dustin Donuts, staked into the asphalt of a parking lot just outside the airport chain link. I check my phone while lined up to place my order. I'm pretty sure that's her flight, so it won't be a long wait. Suddenly, I lost the battle to concentrate on the present, and the memory insinuated its way back to the surface to reclaim my consciousness. The oily mist. Its cool, clammy fingers cling to my skin, making me shiver. The memory always starts with the same sensation, the mist and the feeling of something alien reaching out for me through it. Then the evening sky explodes, beams of light piercing through a murky atmosphere accompanied by strange sounds and a smell I will never forget. I feel like vomiting even now, although I'm vaguely aware that I'm standing in the queue at Dustin Donuts. There's a light floating near the treetops, burning the needles off the spindly pines, then menacing shadows moving through the trees. They're after us. My parents are yelling, picking us up and running blindly through the brush and scrub. A low, gut-shaking sound louder than an explosion turns my insides to jelly. More yelling, more strange noises, knife-edged fear, and I'm swept off my feet into the air, then darkness and nothing. My eyes are suddenly open, but I can't see. Voices whirl around me. There's the prick of something sharp. Then darkness closes in again. "Mister, are you okay?" The question broke through, crashing the illusion. I was back in the gaudy plastic vinyl interior of the donut shop, now at the front of the line. How long had it been? I was waiting for someone to join me, I stuttered, trying to buy time to recover. The short woman behind the order counter, dark graying hair bunched under a net and jammed into a Dustin D baseball cap, glanced impatiently at the line behind me. "Well, you going to order or just hold up the line?" Not sure what to ask for, I spotted two elderly women. Correction. Two women, probably a few years younger than me, engaged in an intense conversation at a nearby table. A forest of abandoned paper takeout cups surrounded by a flock of empty creamers stood testimony to how long they had been there. "Small coffee, double cream, double sugar?" It was more of a question than an order, but it did the trick. "That'll be $3.95, sir. How you paying?" I held up my debit card, not remembering taking it out of my wallet, and swiped. The woman motioned me along. "Next!" She bellowed at the couple standing behind me. Moving past the glass donut display case to the end of the counter, I stood beside the plate glass window, which afforded a view of the parking lot. After what seemed like an hour, a gangly teenage boy shoved a steaming disposable cup across the counter at me. Before I could pick it up, the headlights of an auto cab beamed through the plate glass window as it entered the parking lot, momentarily making the kid's metallized plastic name tag glisten. "Hi, I'm Tom," it proclaimed, black letters standing out in the glare until the cab turned away. "Small, double, double," he called out unenthusiastically, then walked away. So I wouldn't burn my fingers, I wrapped the paper cup in a napkin and returned to the window. A middle-aged woman got out of the back passenger door of the auto cab, a heavy-looking tote bag slung over one shoulder. She paid the driver, then made her way to the glass doors and pushed through. She looked older and rounder than her profile picture. I waved. "Mr. Petrenko!" She yelled loud enough for a few patrons to break off their conversations. I still wasn't sure I wanted to meet her. My lizard brain insisted I run. But after all these years, I was desperate for an explanation, and this person claimed to have one. I put on a smile, walked over, and shook her hand. "Marie Allard? You look a lot younger than your photo." I lied. "And you older." She laughed. I don't like getting my picture taken. The one on my profile page is 10 years old," I admitted, feeling my face heat up. Her eyes slid down to the coffee in my left hand. "Oh, sorry, I wasn't expecting you so soon after your flight. Let's find a table, and I'll get you something. What do you want?" "A tea would be great. Oolong, if they have it. Black." We found a table in an empty corner, and I left her there to get settled in while I stood in line for her tea. Marie claimed she had found me online after reading one of my posts about recurring dreams and uncontrolled flashbacks. Most people, if they believe me at all, think I have PTSD, but Marie swore she had another explanation, one she could only tell me face to face. Intrigued but wary, I agreed to the meeting. Again the damp mist began to claw up my arm, and I slid back into that bad place. The lady behind the till barked at me impatiently. How long had I been standing there gaping at nothing? "What do you want, Mr. Daydreamer?" Tea, please. Black, large." The place had only tea listed on the bright LCD panel behind the counter. There was no point in asking for oolong. It would be whatever they had, probably some past due date discount brand. Tea wasn't a big thing at DD. Embarrassed, I paid, picked up Marie's tea, and wove my way between the backs of chairs haphazardly draped with jackets to our table. "Thanks for the tea, Ivan." Marie sipped at it experimentally, making a face, watching me with an analytic eye. My gaze fell onto her heavy-looking tote bag. "Is that your evidence?" I asked. "Yes, I brought my grandfather's notebooks and case files. He collected everything he could find on your incident. Newspaper cuttings, photocopies of microfiche articles, that sort of thing." My curiosity overwhelmed my caution. "May I?" I asked, beginning to reach across the table. Marie stopped me. "Did you have a flashback just then?" "No," I lied. "It looked like you froze when you reached the front of the queue. Do you know what the triggers are? Does it happen often?" I shrugged. "Like I said in my post, it's mostly random. Stress may be a factor. At least, that's what I've been told. I've had the lapses since I was 7. They're just part of my life now." Marie's features softened. "I hope what I've brought will finally answer some questions for you." "Okay, then let's look," I suggested impatiently. "I know your story, but I'd like to hear it from you," Marie insisted. "There are so many versions floating around the web. I'd like to hear the original." "Ah, are you sure?" I sighed and sipped my now lukewarm, oversweetened coffee. It's just that it's old news, and I'm tired of telling. Please humor me. I want to hear it without all the second-hand embellishments." "Well?" I paused and took another sip of my coffee. "Okay, I guess, but I'm going to make it short." I was 6. It was summer 1960. You know I'm the youngest of 2 kids, right? My father passed away in the 1980s, my sister 2 years ago. And my mother, you should know about from the news stories. That makes me the last survivor, the last living person who was there. "I didn't know about your sister. My condolences," Marie apologized, concentrating on her tea bag to avoid looking at me. "Thanks, I didn't post anything about her, so you couldn't have known. Anyway, that year, my parents decided to take our summer holiday in the north to escape the August heat. We ended up at a place called the Pine Haven Campground at Wabigoon Lake, Ontario. I've been back several times and still don't understand why my parents chose that place. It isn't exactly pristine wilderness, far from it. The campground was located near a mill town. You know, one of those places that boomed when the paper mill opened. A place with a secure future, good-paying jobs for life. Guess that's why people lived there. But the last time I visited, the plant had closed, and the place looked like the party had ended decades ago. Even the giant moose on the side of the highway into town had lost its brave face. It looked like it had finally realized the future would never arrive. At least, that's what its state of repair seemed to suggest. It was covered in graffiti, and a hind leg was falling off. The campground where we stayed was gone, turned into the local landfill. However, that's beside the point, isn't it? No, these are the details I was hoping to hear, Marie assured, plucking her tea bag out before picking up her cup, cradling it in both hands. Okay, I nodded, thinking. In some ways, I wish the area had been able to capitalize on what happened to us. Maybe it could have become a northern Roswell or something like that. At least then, something positive would have come from it all, I explained. We were there for 2 weeks during the Perseid meteor shower. My parents liked watching the night sky. Maybe Wabigoon Lake was the best place to watch it that year. I don't know. Anyway, it was around midnight. My parents woke us up to see the meteors. They had packed blankets and air mattresses. We walked for about 15 minutes into the bush until we came to a rocky, treeless ridge. We climbed to its top, inflated the air mattresses, wrapped ourselves in blankets, and then laid down to watch the sky. The stars were unusually intense. The Milky Way ran from horizon to horizon. It was magical. So it was a cloudless night? Marie interrupted, putting her tea down thoughtfully. In the published versions of your story, you talk about strange lights in the mist. I took a sip of my cold coffee and stared at Marie. What was she really after? I was tired of being exploited. Please continue, she encouraged. The mist came in later, I explained impatiently. We were there to see a meteor shower, and we did see them, at least at first. My parents and sister were excited, but I was cold, damp, bored, and wanted to go back. So I defiantly curled up and closed my eyes, waiting for it to end. I think I fell asleep. The next thing I can recall is my father waking me. The stars were gone, and we were surrounded by a fog. I don't know where it came from. But there was an odd smell, like ozone after an electric spark, only more acrid, more acidic. It burned my throat. My father looked frightened. He told us to leave the air mattresses, but I don't think we headed back to camp. He wanted to get to the highway fast. Maybe it was closer. I can't remember. So we started stumbling through the woods along an old animal trail. For some reason, my parents had turned their flashlights off, and we kept tripping on roots and fallen logs, slowing us down. The fog got thicker, making it harder to find our way, but we could hear the cars on the highway. We were getting close. Then, they found us. Lasers or something beamed down through the trees, like searchlights from something hovering in the sky. The glare was so intense I couldn't make out any details. One beam found me. I froze. Dad grabbed me and began to haul me out of its glare. But it was too late. Another targeted him. The air around us turned into solid crystal, and we were lifted off the ground and into the darkness. I screamed. My dad was yelling. I can't remember what he was saying. Maybe take me, leave the kids, I'm not sure. From there on, my memory is jumbled. I can recall lying in a white, harshly lit space. There were these shadows moving along the walls. For some reason, I couldn't turn my head. It was like my brain had been disconnected from my body. I panicked and tried to yell. The shadows placed something over my nose and mouth. Somehow, I managed to flip onto my side. It was then that I saw the other tables. They all had bodies strapped to them. The shadow figures were fussing around with weird instruments, experimentally poking and prodding the other bodies. I tried to scream but couldn't. Instead, I gagged, then lost consciousness. I don't remember anything after that until we were found. Eventually, a transport truck driver discovered us on the shoulder of the highway 2 weeks later and 100 miles away. I leaned back in the plastic chair and let out a breath. I was finished. Thanks for sharing, Marie said. I've read your father's public account. The one in the local Wabigoon newspaper, I confirmed. Yes, their archives are online now. If I remember correctly, the headline was, Lost Holidaying Family Finally Found Wandering Along Highway. That story didn't mention anything about an abduction, Maria noted. I know. My parents told us not to say anything about that. But when my mother got sick a few weeks later, my father called the newspaper and told them the truth. The editor didn't believe him, and the locals accused us of wandering into a toxic chemical dump. But we weren't anywhere near the pulp and paper plant or the effluent settling pond. My mother got worse, and no one could figure out what was going on. A year later, she passed away. Dad never gave up. He claimed the authorities were burying the incident, that they knew people were being kidnapped by aliens and experimented on. Over the years, I've filed endless Freedom of Information requests. Anything I ever got back was mostly redacted. My father, sister, and I submitted ourselves to polygraph tests, hypnotism, or anything else that would prove we were telling the truth. It took over our lives. We were branded the crazy alien abductees, fame-obsessed fanatics, and worse. Now, if you have something that can help... I stopped to catch my breath. Marie stared at me like she was trying to decide, like she might be about to change her mind. Before I die, I want to know the truth, I pleaded. She heaved her tote bag onto the table and tipped it over, spilling out notebooks, photo albums, and binders. These were my grandfather's, Marie explained. His name was Dr. James Allard, a psychiatric researcher. I've never heard of him, I admitted, suspecting this would be yet another wild goose chase. Marie opened one of the albums, flipped to the first page containing a yellowing newspaper clipping, and spun it around so I could read. He followed your story from the beginning. This scrapbook has every article ever printed on you or your family. I flipped through the pages, skimming the headlines. This is my life. This is what I've become, I sighed, stopping at the end of the methodically laid out album. The last item was a printout of a post I had made 10 years ago. Why? Why was your grandfather so interested? Did he belong to one of those UFO groups? They were pointless to talk to. No one took them seriously. All we ever wanted was an official acknowledgement of the truth, and that whatever happened to us led to a slow death. I'm the last one. Now I'm also sick with the same cancer that killed the rest of my family. Marie pulled a red notebook from the bottom of the pile, then hesitated. I think this may answer your questions, Mr. Petrenko, but you've got to be open-minded. Please remember the context. It was the height of the Cold War, and there was a lot of fringe research, anything that might give either side an edge. I'm not the one who needs to be open-minded. It's the rest of the world. My guard was up. I had been through too many interviews where the entire point was to debunk our story or exploit it to support someone else's ludicrous theories. It happened, I snarled. I lived through it all, and you won't convince me otherwise. Marie carefully placed the notebook at the center of the small table, then looked into my eyes. Was that pity in them? I know it happened, Ivan. Something unconscionable happened to you and your family, but it's not what you think. You're missing critical information. Critical information? I sighed. Here we go. Yet another dismissal, right? No, not at all. Ivan, just listen. Give me a chance. I understand your skepticism. Let me add my part to your story. Then you can take it or leave it, use it or ignore it, whatever you want, but please withhold judgment until I'm finished. That's all I ask. I folded my arms defensively and leaned back in my chair, convinced that, yet again, this would be a waste of time. I should have stayed at home. Okay then, let's get this over with so I can enjoy what time I have left in peace. Marie fortified herself with a sip of her tea and started. I know my father wanted to do this himself, but he wasn't able to. His work is still mostly classified, and he feared for our family and friends if he went public. But it's been over 60 years and a decade since he passed away. He made me promise to wait that long, hoping none of the players would care anymore. Granddad told me about this just before he died, and I promised to wait. Unlike him, I'm not bound by any agreements, so I can say what I want. It will be officially denied, of course, but I have his case studies and notes as evidence. Marie patted the pile of documents on the table between us. I reached for a red notebook. Let me give you some context before you flip through that, Marie offered. That's my grandfather's case study. It's about your family. You were brought to him a few days after the accident. Accident? It was an abduction, not an accident. Please, Ivan, hear me out. My grandfather was working for the Department of Defense, doing psychological research. His area of investigation was how the human brain creates and recalls memories. Like your family, he was vacationing at Wabigoon. And because of the sensitivity of his work, the government always knew where he was and kept an eye on him. It's how he got involved in your case. Case? Yes, case. You were his patients for about 10 days. It's all in these files. He kept duplicates. If they'd known, he would have ended up in prison. He took a risk. That's how important the fate of your family was to him. That can't be right, I complained. We were never in a hospital for 10 days, just an overnight for observation after we were found. There was an interview with the police. They wanted to know what happened to us. We claimed we had gotten lost in the dark while we were stargazing. We were eventually examined by a psychologist after my father started talking about our abduction by aliens, but that was more than 18 months later. We weren't anyone's patients, so we never met your grandfather. Marie dug an old Kodachrome out of the pile of documents and pushed it toward me. That's my grandfather around the time of the incident. He told me they interrupted his holiday, had a car come out and pick him up from the cabin he and my grandmother were staying in. By the time he arrived, they had set up a special ward for your family in a field hospital. You can read the details in the case file. I stared at the faded photo, shaking my head. No, I don't remember him. But something was itching at the corners of my mind. I didn't expect you would. My grandfather was experimenting with a process called depatterning, where a person is subjected to continuous repetitions of a message, while the subject is sedated with a muscular paralytic, something like curare. It's not in the files, but they sometimes used hallucinogens like LSD. His research was part of a Cold War project called MK Ultra. The goal was to create a process to implant false memories, so a captured spy couldn't reveal critical information when they were interrogated. I'm confused. What does this have to do with my family? False memories, Ivan. My grandfather was directed to implant false memories in you to cover up an industrial accident. What industrial accident? I shouldn't have come. You're just like all the others. It happened. We were abducted. I was there, and now I'm dying from the same cancer that took my parents and sister. Explain that away, I demanded, and started to get up. But Marie grabbed my arm. Stop, please, listen. Give me a chance to finish, she begged. You were exposed to an accidental release of chemicals from a test. The case file lists them all. It might help you fight the cancer. People at the tables around us were staring. I waited until they looked away, then sat down. Okay, you've got my attention, I whispered. Still doesn't mean I believe you. I've been down this road before. I know this is not what you expected to hear, but it's the truth, and my grandfather's files are the evidence. There was a lot of money involved, both private and government. It was a new process that would save millions, so the pulp plant's stakeholders couldn't afford to have the project cancelled because someone failed to shut a valve and vented untreated waste gases into the atmosphere. It would have killed industrial development in the region and been a huge embarrassment for the government of the day. The wind blew the cloud of toxins toward the Pine Haven campground where your family was staying. The officials started a fire as a cover story, then evacuated the campground and cottages in the path of the toxic cloud. But no one could find your family. The authorities didn't know you were on a nearby hill stargazing, so they couldn't get you out before the cloud drifted over. That was the mist you got lost in, and the rest of your story, well, that's my grandfather's handiwork. At first, he didn't want to get involved. Then, he received a call, a threat. If he didn't cooperate, his funding would be pulled and his career ruined. After, he felt intensely guilty. He wanted the truth to come out eventually. Marie nodded at the pile of files and journals. It's why he kept all this. It was the 10th anniversary of his death last month. I kept my word, and now I'm here to give you his files. Granddad would have begged for your forgiveness. He was a good person, Ivan. He didn't intend to ruin your lives. I can only guess what finding this out after 60 years must be like. I know your entire life revolved around the abduction story. I'm so sorry. The notes and records are for you. Take your time and read through them. Call me if you want. Marie's phone began to chime. She reached around the orange plastic-backed chair and pulled it from a coat pocket, thumbing it on. That's my ride back to the airport. Sorry, I have to leave. She got up and pulled on her coat, leaving the tote bag and its documents on the stained plastic table. I know this wasn't what you expected, but I hope it helps you. A storm began in my head. Afraid of what I might blurt out, I said nothing, and watched Marie's back as she walked to the coffee shop entrance and pushed through into the night. The closing doors momentarily reflected the glaring headlights of a car directly into my mind, triggering the all-too-familiar memories. Had they been placed there? Had Marie's grandfather created them? The fog rolled in around me, this time fouled by a caustic chemical smell, which made me gag. This is where we like to recommend other podcasts, and today I want to introduce you to Quest Friends. Quest Friends is a supernatural audio cartoon where 5 best friends explore everyday life in the afterlife. From trash possum Pokemon to overdramatic noir mysteries to the honestly pitiful skeleton of Grigory Rasputin, listen as these friends play through absurd adventures inspired by cartoons like The Owl House and Gravity Falls. The characters are over the top, the comedy is good-spirited, and the puns never ever end. You can find more information about Quest Friends at questfriendspodcast.com, or you can start listening right away by searching Quest Friends on your favorite podcasting app. You can help us create original content twice a month by heading over to ko-fi.com/makeshiftstories and making a one-time donation, or becoming an ongoing supporter at patreon.com/makeshiftstories. And if you can, please leave us a review or rating wherever you're listening to the podcast. It helps new listeners discover us. If you'd like to connect with us, please email makeshiftstories@gmail.com or visit our website at makeshiftstories.com. We release Makeshift Stories around the beginning and middle of the month. This month's story was written and read by Alan V. Hare. Opening and closing themes were composed and recorded by Matthew Erdman. Audio production and editing by Vicata Studios. Makeshift Stories is released under a Creative Commons non-commercial, attribution, no derivative license.